Hi, well, welcome to Greenlee Art Spaces Talk by Rowan Harrison. My name is Kimberly Hawking, and I'm the director and curator of Greenlee Art Space. For those of you who don't know us yet, welcome to Greenlee Art Space. And for those of you who do, we're so glad you're here again. Greenlee Art Space is a 501c3 nonprofit gallery dedicated to enriching lives and cultivating community through art. This is done through creating contemplative art shows, bringing art to community, and providing a space for art making, mentoring, and art therapy. This presentation is thanks to Greenlee's recent local impact grant from the California Arts Council. This grant serves to highlight the artwork of underrepresented populations. As a recipient of this grant, we are working with Neshkinukat, a California Native American artist network. We'll have 2 more artist talks and a closing with storytelling and song that you won't want to miss. See our website and social media postings for more info. We would like to thank the California Arts Council for their generous support. For this grant, Greenlee Art Space has installed We Are All Related, an exhibition of Neshkinukat artists. This exciting exhibit has many different types of Native American artwork. There is mask making, quilting, beadwork, and some beautiful pottery by Rowan Harrison. This exhibit is now available for viewing by appointment. So artist Rowan Harrison is an award-winning ceramic artist residing in the city of Fullerton, California. He has been actively promoting and exhibiting works of art within the Southern California area and abroad. As a Native American artist, he is currently involved in the Native American art market community by exhibiting and presenting at the Heard Museum Native American Art Show, the Autry National Museum of the West, and the Santa Fe Indian Art Market. He is involved in programming at the Sachewa Native American Cultural Center, presenting programs and workshops on traditional Native American pottery. Rowan also conducts culturally affiliated programming with the Los Angeles County Public Library System, providing hands-on presentations and workshops on traditional Native American pottery. Combining his experience and years as a practicing artist has contributed to opportunities as a part-time ceramics instructor. He has established teaching endeavors at the Irvine Fine Arts Center and the Muckenthaler Cultural Center. He enjoys the rich and rewarding experience of sharing with and instructing students in an art form that is antiquated and indigenous in origin. We hope you get a chance to see his amazing artwork in person at Greenlee Art Space's current exhibition, which is on display until November 29th. Rowan's work is very powerful, combining his Native American heritage with contemporary art expressions. I'm pleased to introduce to you Rowan Harrison. Yay, Rowan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kimberly. Thank you for tuning in, wherever you're tuning in at, whether it be here in southern sunny California, somewhere here on the West Coast, or somewhere on the East Coast, or somewhere in between. Thank you for zooming in. Thank you for attending this online presentation. My name is Rowan Harrison, and I work in a variety of mediums. I do hand-built, handmade, hand-painted pottery. And this is basically pottery that is done without the means of a conventional potter's wheel. So the process I work in is a very slow process. It has traditional and cultural tie-ins to my Native American background. Okay, and I also do pen and ink designs on paper. The original pen and ink design illustrations that I do, they're all original artwork. They're all freehand. They're all hand drawn. And throughout the process of my work, throughout the body of my work, all the design work that I do, whether it be on the clay work, whether it be on paper, again, it's all freehand. I don't use any rulers or compasses or stencils or anything like that. My background is I am half Pueblo of Isleta. We are part of the 19 different Pueblo groups in the Southwest, mostly in the state of New Mexico. And I'm Pueblo of Isleta on my mom's side. And on my dad's side, I come from the Navajo Nation, or the Dene. And our people are located in the north, mostly in the northwestern part of Arizona, near the Four Corners region, We occupy a little bit of the northwestern part of New Mexico, a little bit of Colorado, a little bit of Utah. The Navajo people have one of the biggest, largest reservations in the United States. The Pueblo people of the Southwest, we have a very, very rich, enduring legacy in working with the elements of Mother Earth. And when I talk about the elements of Mother Earth, I'm specifically speaking about the abundance of clay that is out in Pueblo land. So our people have been working with clay, they've been working with water, they've been working with different plants, different vegetation, different rocks, different types of natural resources, the air, and of course, fire. They've been using these natural, precious elements that have been provided by Mother Earth, and by utilizing and by experimenting with them, they are continually practicing the art of hand-built, hand-coiled, and hand-painted pottery. This art form goes back thousands of years, back to our ancestors, which we refer to as the Anasazi people, or the ancient ones. The Anasazi people were the first inhabitants to live and to build communities in the Southwest, particularly in a region called the High Colorado Plateau, which is near the Four Corners region. The Anasazi people, they were practitioners of making, creating, and building handmade pottery. Pottery served many different functions for their community, for their culture, whether it be from simple utilitarian pieces like plates, cups, serving bowls, dough bowls, water vases, canteens. Pottery was a big art movement, and it was massively produced amongst the Anasazi people. The height of the Anasazi people was around 800 to 1200 AD. And we kind of consider this period as the pottery age. So pottery, basketry making, working in wood, these were some of the finer art endeavors that our people, our ancestors indulged themselves. Pottery, the use of pottery was also widely used, not only for simple utilitarian purposes, but also for religious ceremonies as well. Specific shapes, specific forms, specific designs were created so that they would play an intricate role in the various ceremonies and rituals amongst the Anasazi people. And this is where I come from. I come from this lineage, from the Anasazi people down to, the Pueblo people. For me, I learned my craft from my grandmother. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but raised here in Southern California. And so during my childhood, my family would travel back to New Mexico, back to the land of enchantment, back to the land of our people, the Pueblo people of Isleta. And it was during these times where I would spend some summers with my grandmother, and my grandmother would periodically go to her shed, and she would bring out a bag of natural processed clay. And she would bring this bag into her home, into the kitchen. And it was there that she started introducing me and my cousin on how to make small little different pottery forms, small little pottery exercises consisting of pinch pot forms, little animal forms, and so forth like that. And there's a picture of my grandmother, Anita Abeda. So she was very instrumental in getting me on my road and on my journey into the wonderful world of pottery making and ceramics. So to give you an example of some of my work, if we can do the slide presentation, and I'll walk you through some of the examples of what my work looks like if you've never seen it before. Yeah, it's a lovely piece. Wow. So I work in a different variety of clays. When it comes to my work, there's different tones of clays, there's different colors of clays out there. So I try to work in all different ones. This piece here is basically what we call a Mesa Red Clay. It's kind of a terracotta clay. So this clay has a very nice, rich, red, warm tone to it. Again, all the piece here is hand built, hand coiled, hand painted. It was constructed without the use of a modern day potter's wheel. On this piece here, most of the surface designs is done in black. So, and there's this, on this piece here, there's a carved design near the neck form, and there are these small engraved dots here. So this is one type of clay body that I use. If we go on to the next slide. And I also use a lot of white clay bodies, okay? This was a nice, big, round, full piece I had. And this was made using a white, low-fire earthenware clay body. With the colors that I use throughout my body of work, I pretty much stick to a very simple palette consisting of blacks, consisting of reds, oranges, greens, and blues. I like to think of these colors representing the colors that are found out in nature. And of course, the color and the tone of the clay itself is another color that comes out in the work. And this one is white. So if we go on to the next one. And here is another piece made in a white low-fire earthenware clay. This piece here is done in green. Okay, I love to use the color green. I like thinking green as representing the green of the earth, the plants, the vegetation. That's when I use the green, that is the thought process, and that's what it represents. And also you notice in this piece here, this one, the main design element is dots. I use a lot of dots within my work. I like to think of dots representing the stars in the sky, representing what we see in the nighttime sky. And I like to think of the dots representing our ancestors who have moved on to the heavens. And when you're in New Mexico or when you're in the desert and you look at the nighttime sky, it is just littered with thousands and thousands of stars. And I like to think of that as being our ancestors watching us, taking care of us, blessing us as we go through our nighttime hours. And the dots represent the stars in the sky. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, this one here is another type of clay that I use here. It's called Micaceous Clay, or also shortly known as Mica Clay. Okay, this is a clay that I cannot get here in Southern California. So when I want to make pieces in this particular clay body, I have to actually order it from Albuquerque. So I have two sources in New Mexico where I can get the Mica Clay. The beauty about this clay is it's a very groggy clay. So it has a lot of grog, has a lot of sand in it. But the beauty about it, it has all these little flecks of mica in it. And after the firing process, these flecks of mica appear on the surface of the piece. They appear on the surface of the clay. And when you turn it into a certain amount of light, you can see that mica showing on the surface. And here's a close-up of that. With the mica pieces, I kind of refrain from doing a lot of decorative overall coverage of work or designs. So I kind of try to keep it simple with the design work on the mica pieces. I want to make sure that that mica gets fully represented on the final piece. All right, so we go on to the next one. Okay, so basically that's an example of some of my clay work that I do. And so this morning I'm going to go really quickly and give you a brief demonstration and how I go throughout the process of my work. For today's demonstration, I will be working in a low-fire white earthenware clay body. Okay, and also just to go back really quick, for the past couple of years, I've been also experimenting and making my own clays from natural resources throughout my travels to Arizona and New Mexico, and I found some sources here in California. So this is a practice I've been doing for the past year and a half, kind of processing and making my own clays, which is a whole another endeavor unto itself. But for this demonstration, we're going to be using a low-fire white earthenware processed clay. And basically, when I start my pieces, usually I start off making a very flat form or tortilla-like shape. And with this form, I will set it into a pre-formed bowl. Okay, so I have my pre-formed bowl here, and basically what I would do is I would just lay this clay into my mold here. And basically what I am creating is the base or the bottom of my form. Okay, so I'll just let the clay settle into the bowl here. I will take a knife and I will just cut away on the excess clay real quick. Okay, and I will just let this clay sit in this bowl until some of that water or moisture evaporates from the clay. When you start working with fresh clay, clay has a great abundance of water in it. It has a lot of moisture in it. And it's this moisture content that gives the clay its ability to be shaped, to be formed any way you want to with your hands. So it has a lot of water content. So when you first work with it, it's very malleable. It's very, it moves around a lot. So I need the clay to kind of harden up. I need that water to start evaporating so I can start stacking fresh clay on top of the piece before I can go on to the whole building process. Okay, so with my hand-built pieces, I use very limited tools for this process. If we go to the slide with the tools, give an idea. Okay, so some of the tools I use, if you can see in the picture there, I use these metal, what are called bendable ribs. They're really thin pieces of metal. They're small, they fit easily in your hand. They're very flexible, so you can kind of hold them to a way that it goes along the curves of round pottery forms. And also, one of these tools has a jagged teeth on the tool, and this jagged teeth is what I use to blend clay together. Okay, another tool that I use is, this metal bendable rib. It doesn't have the jagged teeth as well. So this one I use as a smoothing tool, smooth out all the work that I do with the clay. Other items that I use there, you can see, is a steak knife. I use some of these wooden tools to help smooth out clay. Sometimes I use a spoon, and sometimes I use a very simple, everyday item that we see around the house, a popsicle stick. Okay? All right, so the building process. The building process, or what I use to create and develop forms, are basically coils. Okay? When I make my coils, I take a thick piece of clay, okay, and I just kind of squeeze it into my hand, and I develop a large, thick, very rudimentary, thick coil. And with that coil, I place it on the table here, and then I will just roll out the coil using my hands. Just taking my hands, and I'm putting a lot of pressure when I roll out my coils. I basically use the bottom of my hands and just kind of move the clay around between the bottom of my hands and the top of the table. The more I do this, the clay will respond because the clay is wet, and eventually what will happen is the coil will start developing, it will get thinner, it will start to grow, and it will start to stretch. And the more I repeat this process, just using my hands, I will develop a very long, thick coil, just like this. Okay, now with these coils, what I do is I will take them, using my metal bendable score. I will dip the score, get some water on it, and I will score my pot. So I started developing a form here. I would say I'm about halfway through its construction process. Okay, so I'm just scoring the rim here, and I will take one coil and I will carefully place it on the rim. Okay, but before I do that, I want to add a little bit of water to it. Okay, water allows the clay to stick, allows the clay to adhere together, kind of works like glue. Now I'll take the excess clay off that I don't need, and I will simply use my fingers and just blend those two ends together. Okay, now we'll go and place another coil on here. And when it comes to traditional Native American pottery, when I talk about traditional Native American pottery, when I use that term, that is basically pottery that is all traditionally handmade, where the clay is dug up out of the earth, where the clay is all hand processed. The construction process of traditional Native American pottery is all done in this type of manner, using coils, using pieces of clay to build up forms. Again, our people, we never, traditional Native American pottery doesn't rely on too many conventional methods or tools, but more on just fundamental processes in working with clay. It's a very long process. It takes a great deal of time to actually construct forms. It's very slow, so it's not a very quick process. But I like to think when I'm working in this manner with the clay, a lot of time is spent not only with the clay itself. The clay has this kind of spirituality to it. It kind of has this personality to it, believe it or not. And when you start working with clay in this manner, you really start to flesh out what clay can do and what it can't do. So you start, kind of figuring out, what the clay will want to do today. And also working in this manner too, you spend so much time working on something. You start building a rapport. You start building a relationship with the work, with the whole process. And that is one of the rewarding aspects of working in hand building methods, and one of the aspects that I really enjoy. Okay, so once I have the coils on here, my next step is to blend them all together. And basically my blending tool is a metal bendable rib again, with all the little jagged little pieces, the jagged marks on there. And I would just take my tool and just start blending all this clay together. Just blend, blend, and blend. And it definitely takes a lot of time to blend it. Things don't happen too quickly. I use very little amounts of water. I don't need a lot of water for this, but just little amounts applied onto the clay helps the clay move around a bit. Helps with the flow of the blending process. And so I will just go here and just blend until all the coils are blended together in their entirety. And when I'm blending, both of my hands are working together. They're working together in conjunction with one another and in harmony. So there's definitely a rhythm. There's definitely a flow that occurs when you work in this manner. And, you know, in all these aspects of hand building is very, you know, it's very contemplative, it's very meditative. And then once I thoroughly blend all the coils together, creating a cohesive wall of clay, my next step in the building process is to smooth it out. And this is where I use my smoothing tools, whether it be my metal bendable rib to smooth out all the work, or a wooden tool, okay? And that helps with the smoothing process as well. So when it comes to working with clay, the construction process, basically this is kind of a quick little demo on how I achieve and constructing my forms. Very important. For me, I always try to strive and get consistent, symmetrical, and balanced forms. So it's very important to start off with a very solid foundation and a very well balanced foundation. And if you start off with that, you can maintain that balance, that symmetry throughout the whole construction phase of the process. You have to take time out to kind of analyze what is developing. You have to look at it from different angles to make sure that what you're building is consistent to what you have in mind, okay? So once the construction process is done, then what I do is I let the clay dry. I try to not let it dry too fast. I try to control the drying process by applying a plastic bag over the clay. And I try to let the clay, give it maybe 3 or 4 days, or 2 or 3 days to let it dry, to let all the clay do its thing, to let it adhere to one another. And that's very important. And then once that period of time is over, then I will let the clay just dry on its own accord, you know, in room temperature. And once the clay dries, then what it does, all that water evaporates from the clay. Okay, the majority of the water evaporates. There's still little water molecules inside the clay, but basically what it does, it turns into what is called bone dry clay, or what ceramic artists refer to as greenware. Okay, and once it gets to this stage, this is the time when I start going through a polishing stage. This is the time when I kind of look at the surface. If there's any sort of surface imperfections, any sort of nicks, any sort of divots, or what have you, then I will work those out using a little bit of sandpaper. And then once all that's worked out, then I'm ready to go into the hand painting process. Okay, so before I go into the hand painting process, I go through this step, what is called hand burnishing. Okay, and basically I'm taking my piece here. Okay, this is all bone dry clay. And what I'm doing is I'm using a very smooth stone. The smoother the stone, the better the results. Now we'll take some water, apply a little water onto the surface of the clay, okay? And I will let that water settle into the clay, let the clay absorb it, and then once it starts absorbing halfway, then I will get my stone, and I will just rub across the surface of the clay. Just like this, back and forth, and just rub. And what this does, not only does it strengthen the clay, but most importantly, it creates this nice, polished, smooth sheen across the surface of the clay. And this is a wonderful surface to paint on. It allows the paints to to glide across the surface of the clay in a very crisp manner. Okay, and that's I'm not quite sure if you can see that, but there is this shiny surface that is created when you burnish clay. Okay, and then once that process is over, then I go into the hand painting process. Okay, so when it comes to hand painting, I use a different variety of tools or paint brushes. Very small ones, so we can look at the slide there. Quick. Okay, so in the picture here, you can see the different types of brushes I use. They have very small bristles. A lot of these brushes are what we refer to as liner brushes or script brushes. The thickest brush I use is a round brush, which I use to fill in areas or fill in shapes to do my fill work. And then I also use another brush that kind of has this chiseled edge, and this brush is used to create thick lines. Another item I use is a pencil, a soft graphite pencil, more like a B-lead, which is very soft graphite. So these are, and also the paints I use basically underglazes is what I use. These are ceramic paints, which are designed to get infused into the clay as it goes through the firing process. Okay, so go on to the next one. And also, ample amounts of tea, ample amounts of music really helps with this whole process as well. Okay, so when I'm showing my work, or when people look at my work and they see all the design work, they're really like kind of fascinated by that, and they're really impressed by all the patterns and all the designs. Usually the first thing that people ask me, well, how do you get those designs and patterns on there? Or I tell them the process, that they're all hand painted, and I usually tell them it's all freehand work. And usually I will say, you know, I don't use any rulers, compasses, or stencils when I approach doing the hand painting of the pieces. And people are like really impressed, and they want to know, well, how do you do that? Well, for one, I create what is called a grid. Okay, so whether it be a flat form, whether it be a three-dimensional form, what I do is I take my pencil, and basically I will create what is called a grid. And I will create these spaces that are within close proximity to one another, just using a pencil. And I take my pencil and I draw a line across the middle of the piece, and I draw a line again across the other side of the piece, creating 4 equal quarters. And I just keep breaking it down. And it's within these little sections that is where I will lay my design work in. So that is a really quick example of how I get all the patterns so balanced and so symmetrical and so uniform and aligned. All right. So on this particular piece here, this piece I am creating the small little spiral motifs, and I'm using green as my main color. Get some paint here. Okay, and when it comes to the hand painting process, this is very, very time consuming. Takes a long, it's like, oh my God, when will it ever end process. Many moons to paint something. But it's very rewarding, because when I approach my hand painting process, I really don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have any preconceived ideas. I just kind of let, you know, the designs develop on their own accord, if you will. So here, basically, you know, I'll take my brush, I will dip it into my pool of paint, and I will just start applying the paint across the surface of the clay. And I'm very careful about this. I'm very focused. I try to put myself in the moment, trying not to think about anything too much, and just really focusing, concentrating, trying to keep my hand as still as possible, resting it on the form itself, or resting my hand on the table gives me a great amount of control. It limits the shakiness of my hand. So, you know, and I just create one line at a time. And the time it takes for me to paint a whole piece depends on how big the form is, how much surface area there is to cover, but anywhere from 15, 20, 25, 30 plus hours to hand paint a design. And again, it's very, very meditative work. You sit here for hours and you start doing it. You kind of start getting into this place to what most artists commonly refer to as, I guess, the zone. So you lose yourself in many different ways. Okay, and then once the piece is hand painted, then it's ready to be fired. And I usually fire my pieces in an electric kiln, and they fire around anywhere from 17 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit for a period of about 6 to 8 hours. So, and then once it goes through one firing process, then it's done. And then you have a piece of pottery that is handmade and hand painted. So that is basically just a real quick gist on how I go about. On how I go about doing my pottery pieces. Okay, a big part of my body of work is, another big part of it is my pen and ink designs on paper. So I've been working with the pottery forms for 20 plus years now, working with all these different designs that are representations of Southwestern traditional Pueblo motifs, patterns, and elements. A lot of the shapes that I use, a lot of the elements that I use in my artwork are all represent some type of element of what is out in nature, in the Pueblo world. So a lot of these designs, motifs have traditional and cultural value to them. Okay, so another big part of my work is my pen and ink illustrations, which I am doing here. I'm in the process of creating one here. So if we go through the slides, I will give you examples of some of my pen and ink designs. So again, I've been doing the pottery work for 20 plus years. I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I started thinking about what would these designs look like if I applied them on paper. So going through a period of experimentation, I came to find out that, yeah, you can get crazily intricate and go off in so many different tangents and so many different design processes and elements when you apply it on a two-dimensional plane on paper. Here's a piece that I made here. Lots of detail. This one has orange in it. I like to think of the orange representing the fire of the earth or the clays of the earth. If you're traveling through the Southwest, you know, you'll run across these mesas, these plateaus that have these, that are full with iron oxide, which gives it that red tone to it. And I like to think of these colors representing that and the fire that is used to fire pottery. Okay, if we go into the next slide. Okay, and I also found out when you start doing design work on paper, you know, you're not just limited to working in a very symmetrical way. Round forms. I love working with circles. Circles is the most basic shape that is out there in nature, that is out there in the universe. The circle to me represents it represents a cycle of life. It represents infinity. In a Native American context, it represents the sacred hoop or the sacred drum. So circles are very, it's a big shape form that I use. And also I like using these spiral motifs as well. Spiral motifs, you see that a lot in nature as well. It's a very natural design. If you think of the hurricane pattern. And the spiral motifs, I like to think of what representing wisdom, representing growth. And also in the Native American world, you know, those spiral elements, if you see them out on petroglyphs, near ruins, somewhere on rocks, they will tell you which way the people move. So they represent markers of movement or symbol directions, direction symbols. And also if you look on the background of this piece, a lot of dots, all hand drawn, all hand done. And that is a very time consuming process. We go on to the next one. And then with some designs, with some patterns, you know, I like to have this free flowing artistic element to it, you know, lines that just like to flow randomly, loosely. I spent many years doing in the live drawing program at my local community college. So I have a lot of years of drawing under my belt. And that comes very handy with what I do now. So, you know, with some designs, you know, I like to play with these lines. I like shapes that overlap each other, that kind of crisscross each other and so forth like that. And I think that's well represented in this particular piece. Go on to the next one. Okay, and here we have a piece that the basic shapes that I'm using again are circles. This one has the color blue. So blue, I like to think blue representing the blue of the earth, the oceans, the lakes, the rivers, the streams. When you go out to New Mexico, you look at the big blue New Mexico sky. So when I'm ever using blue, I'm thinking of all those elements that are out in nature that are tied into the color blue. I like to use a lot of fine line work, a lot of cross-hatching work. And I like to think of the fine line work as representing rain. If you ever travel through the Southwest during the monsoon season, which is usually in July and August, you mostly will run into big, massive thunderstorm clouds. And you'll eventually, at some points in time during the day, you'll find yourself caught in a big torrential downpour. And I like to see that rain, if you see it from afar, from a distance, out on the horizon, they look like lines just cascading and falling to Mother Earth and nurturing Mother Earth as it needs to be. So that's what, you know, the line work represents in my body of work, the lines. All right. Okay, so we can go. So another thing I like to use also is, you know, these half circled, you know, when I use circles, I like to use half circle motifs. I like to think of these representing clouds. So a lot of these shapes, a lot of these forms that you see throughout my work, you know, they all have some sort of link. They all have some sort of representation of what we see in the natural world, whether they be plants, mountains, rain, clouds, the stars, the planets, you know, the round forms that I mentioned that I love using so much. I like to think of those representing the planets in the sky, the sun, the moon. Yeah, so there are a lot of things in my work that are representations of the natural world. You know, and, you know, so it gives it this kind of very natural, I guess, element to the work, I guess, if you want to say. Okay, so basically, when I start a pen design, we go in here. I started this pen design here probably like about a week ago, and I would say I'm probably maybe halfway through the process, maybe something like that. I'm not quite sure yet what will develop. But if we go through the slideshow, I'll take you on how I go about and with my work. So basically, when I approach my pen and ink designs, you know, I'm sitting here with an empty space, with a nice clean sheet of toned, Canson, acid-free paper. And when I look at it, you know, I just see a virtual world of limitless possibilities of applying different designs to the surface. And so with this one here, I just started with 2 basic shapes, 2 basic circles, or maybe 3. And that's where this design started from, just using, again, 2 basic, very universal shapes, a circle. So we go on to the next one. And then, you know, once I have those shapes down, usually what I do is, you know, I'm very careful. I use a pencil and I draw out the shapes using graphite lead on the paper. And when I draw them out, I want to be very attentive to the shapes. I want to make sure that each shape is the same size, they have the same balance, they have the same symmetry before I move on. So when I'm laying them down with pencil, there's a lot of adjusting, there's a lot of analyzing before I actually start working and laying using the pens. So we go on to the next one. Okay, and you can see that kind of process here. Let's go on to the next slide with the pencil. Yeah, that one. Yes, so we can kind of see that process here. I started, you know, I established those 2 large round circle forms, and now I'm building up 2 other shapes below them or on top of it. And again, they're outlined in pencil. And, you know, I will, you know, before I use my pens, the types of pens I use basically Prismacolor pens. I use the Micron pens, and sometimes I'll use the Staedtler pens. But basically, those are the 3 types of brands I use. And they all have these small little nubs to them, so they're very, they're fine art pens. So if we go on to the next slide. Okay, and then, you know, once I feel that I got the shapes in balance, once they, you know, I feel that I can move on and start applying the ink, then I start applying the ink using whatever pen that I feel I want to use, depending on the line quality I want to develop. And so, you know, I just start messing with the forms, start adding other elements to the forms. So we can move it on. Let's go on to the next one. Oh, I guess that's it. Okay, so yeah, so with this whole process, you know, it's all about building things up. And it's all about adding shapes, laying down shapes, layering shapes. You know, and it's just not adding random things. You know, I really kind of have to stop and think about, okay, what's going to work here? Is this shape going to work here? Would this particular element, or would this design work better with this, or how is it going to flow? So there's a great deal of thought process behind it, and that's the beauty about it. You think about it, and you just, as you go along, you just watch it develop, and you just watch it grow, and then finally you get to a place where you're like, okay, I think I'm done. And you know, and that's a big part of my whole hand-drawn, freehand, original pen and ink design process. Or, you know, just in short. So yeah, this is an hour presentation, so we're almost at that hour mark. So yeah, I want to thank you for tuning in. I know it was kind of quick. There's a lot of other details to be covered in this whole process, a lot of things to discuss and so forth like that. So I think we're going to be going to a kind of a Q&A session right now. But again, thank you so much for tuning in, wherever you're tuned in at. I really appreciate it. You can always go to see more of my work. You can always go to my website at twotribespottery.com. You know, I have a gallery there. You can always, there's all kinds of fun information about my work and, of course, myself and all that good stuff. Okay, so if we want to, I guess, move on to the Q&A session. Yeah.
All right. So we've got some different comments. One is "You rock, Rowan" from Kat, and I'm not sure, Daze maybe. I'm hoping I'm saying that right. Yeah. So Gail Warner asks, before metal scores or commercial brushes, what did they use for pottery?
Oh, that's a really good question. I just love these like online presentations because you never know what's going to happen. But yeah, you know, in ancient times, in traditional times, you know, our people would use for brushes, they would use yucca leaves. I know, or horse, you know, animal hair would make good brushes. Gourds were widely used as smoothing tools. Rocks, sticks, you know, whatever sort of natural, whatever they can find out in the natural world that would work with working with clay. Gourds is a big part of, you know, a lot of traditional Native American artists who work in pottery use a lot of gourd pieces as a smoothing tool. So a lot of the tools back then were, you know, just made from whatever natural resources they had at their disposal. So.
Great. Thank you, Rowan. All right. Next, we have a question from Kat, and I think she's asking about the clay pieces, if the pieces are porous and only low fired.
The pieces, they are mostly low fire work. And yeah, they can hold water. They're non-porous, so yeah, you can put water in them. I wouldn't say they're 100% non-porous. It does hold water, but I find when I put water in them, sometimes, you know, moisture will develop on the outside of the form, but it will hold water there for a period of time. It won't ruin the form in any sort of way. But yeah, so yeah, you can put water in them to a certain degree. But they're mostly, the work I do is mostly decorative work.
All right, great. Well, if anybody else has questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. And let's see. So we have a comment from Carol Churchill, I believe. And she says that my interest in Pueblo culture began in elementary school and then the 1960s. We constructed a cardboard Pueblo and learned hand-coiled clay pots. In junior high, I had a teacher who thankfully shared the truth about the Native American experience, which was shocking and opened my eyes to the pain and unfairness experienced by indigenous people. In my 30s, I read actual treaties signed by the US government. I am thankful that grandmothers are sharing their skills so that I can learn and appreciate and remember and teach future generations. Rowan's process is inspirational. So thank you for that, Carol.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And also, you know, I also like to, you know, say about that is, you know, my artwork, you know, because I was born in Albuquerque and I was raised here in Southern California, mostly in Los Angeles, you know, I was raised off the reservation. So, you know, I'm kind of like one of these urban Native Americans, if you will. But I found over the years that my artwork, you know, what I do really brings me back to my Native American culture, to my Native American roots. In many different shapes, forms, and fashions. And that's really important for me because, you know, I'm not living on the reservation or in Indian land. I'm here in the city. So I need, you know, this is one aspect of my life that really brings me back down to my culture, which is really important for me, the arts. So.
Wonderful. All right, so we have a comment from Amanda, woo, go Rowan. And then from Claudia Brentwood, she says, always love your work. So,
Oh,
yeah. Basically, Rowan, I have a question. In one of the pottery pieces that we saw that looked like there were some metal pieces up toward the top. Could you tell us what those pieces are and your process of about putting those into the piece?
Yeah, I kind of forgot to mention about that. I'm always, living here in Los Angeles, you see a lot of different artwork, in all different styles for different periods. And I'm always kind of like fascinated about assemblage artwork. Basically, assemblage artwork is where artists will take discarded, everyday items, made out of whatever material, and they will bring them to a studio and they will put them together in a sculpturally pleasing aesthetic manner. Some of my favorite people that work in this manner is Bruce Conner, Robert Rauschenberg, George Herms. So I've always been fascinated about assemblage work. And I got to a point in my pottery, journey where I thought about, what if I start bringing metal elements into the clay work? So, I started working with different little metal elements like nails, different types of metal pieces, bottle caps, and just bringing, found objects into the clay work to give it another whole different, direction. And over time, I kind of thought about this narrative of what it represents. And whenever I start working with metal items and I start bringing it into the clay work, I like to think of it as a balance of these two different worlds. The clay work representing the natural world, the land of what's out in the Pueblo world, what's out in native world, Mother Earth. And I like to think of the metal objects or the found objects that I use periodically representing the world of industrialization or technology. And these are kind of worlds that we are living in right now, especially for Native American communities across the United States, especially for traditionalists. They're trying to balance those two worlds together to continue maintaining their cultural way of life and their traditions. So whenever I use these two elements, I'm kind of thinking of that particular story, the balance of these two worlds.
All right, great, Rowan. It looks like you answered a question that Lily and Gigi had about using found objects in your work as an element. So thanks for talking about that. And Gail said that you have an inspiring presentation, Rowan. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
And then Amanda asks you, Rowan, when is the next in-person workshop that you're going to have, if you are having any?
Oh, that's a really good question. In person, well, we are here at the Muckenthaler Cultural Center. Okay, we are here in the ceramic studio, and here the Muckenthaler is located in Fullerton. So I do pottery classes here. We have a ceramics program. We have classes for children and for adults, and I'm one of the adult instructors. So right now we are currently holding programming very safely in a very careful manner. So yeah, if you're interested in taking a class, you go to the Muckenthaler website, www.themuck.org. They give you more information about our clay classes. As far as doing other presentations, I'm not quite sure yet, but once I have something out there, I will definitely put a posting either on my Facebook feed or my Instagram feed, or I'll put some information on it on my website at twotribespottery.com. So hopefully that will happen soon. Just kind of look out for that.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much, Rowan. And I want to thank my son, Nathan Hawking, for his great work running the Zoom. Yay, Nathan. And my husband, David, who, scoot your head in here, he does a lot of the behind the scenes work to make all of this possible. So thank you so much. And oh, go ahead, Rowan.
Yes, thank you so much for putting this presentation on. And if you're still watching at home, look out for other future presentations by Greenlake. There's a lot to learn about, Native American art, Native American culture. Other artists will be showing and sharing their story and their artwork from a different angle and a different perspective from what I have. So I hope you get a chance to tune into future programming by Greenlake Art Space. And thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, you're so welcome. Yeah, our next ones that are coming up are going to be, we have a presentation by Nadia Little Warrior on November 8th. And so we'll have information on our website about how to sign up for that soon. It'll be at the same time, same place, 11 a.m. on Zoom. And then on the 15th, we'll have a presentation by Peggy Fontenot. And that will be another really wonderful presentation, which talks a lot about many of the social and political issues that are facing Native Americans. So those are some things you won't want to miss. And we're really excited about our closing, which I don't know if by then we'll have it in person, but it would be lovely if we did. So thanks so much. And thanks for everyone who's attended. And we're very grateful. So, all right.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Bye,
Peace.
guys.